The Gabby Petito case has sparked a conversation about domestic violence and how to spot the signs of toxic relationships. Before Petito disappeared, police body cameras showed officers talking to both Petito and her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, after an altercation she had with him. And now the police department in Utah, where the couple was pulled over, is preparing for an investigation into how officers handle the situation. For more on this, I want to bring in Dr. Daniel Bober. He is a psychiatrist, certified addiction medicine physician, and a former mental health policy fellow in the United States Senate through the American Psychiatric Association. Doctor, thanks so much for joining us. This is a discussion that I've long wanted to have, both Anne-Marie and I, because we just to each other talked about how that one moment where those police officers had that interaction with Gabby and Brian Laundrie, that, you know, there needs to be a larger discussion about how police in general, and I don't want to pick on these police officers because they may have done everything by the book, but the larger discussion has to be about how law enforcement officers can spot the potential signs of a relationship that's in distress and what kind of training that entails. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, I wouldn't be too hard on them. I mean, I think if parents can't even spot a toxic relationship, I don't know that police can with such limited interaction. I mean, unless there's visible injuries and both people in the party are playing it cool and keeping it a secret, I think it would be very hard for even the police to detect something like that.
Yeah, doctor, that's one of the sort of complicated things about a toxic or violent or abusive relationship is that it's not like that 100% of the time. There are good times, and often that is what is presented to the public or presented to family members. So outsiders, you know, and even law enforcement may not be aware of just how bad things are. And when we talk about the Petito case, there's this other layer, right? Their relationship, what we think is their relationship, was all over social media. We know that the thing about social media is no one ever shows their bad days. Everyone's having a great life. But I'm wondering, you know, when it comes to toxic relationships and abusive relationships, when you kind of fold in social media, does it make it even more challenging for outsiders to recognize that there's a problem here? Because the public face of the relationship always looks happy.
Well, absolutely. That's what I call the Facebook fallacy, right? Everyone wants to try to put their best foot forward. You know, healthy relationships are based on trust, communication, and mutual respect. And it's very difficult to know what's going on. I always say that the only two people that know what's going on in a relationship are the two people in the relationship. But there are some signs that we can look for, and there are some lessons that we can take from this. You know, any types of jealousy, possessiveness, being controlling, any attempts to denigrate, disparage, or degrade the person, particularly in a public setting, is concerning. Attempts to control the person, to have them withdraw from their friends, and then looking at the person. Is there changes in their weight, in their sleep, in their hygiene? All these could be potential warning signs that the person is in a toxic relationship.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about what those warning signs of a toxic relationship are. Because, again, going back to how to spot when somebody might be in distress, Anne-Marie points out that there are, more often than not, good days. But I sort of think back, and you mentioned, Doctor, about like how you're brought up and how you're raised and how parents can play a role. I had a little sister growing up. Anne-Marie's an only child, so I had a little sister. And when you're little, and you know we're only a couple of years apart, you know siblings fight, and that's what we did. But I remember, you know, as I got a little older, like when I was 4 or 5, and I went to, you know, as little kids, you hit your sister or she hits back, and my mother pulled me aside and had, even at that early age, a very, very stern, I'll say, a stern conversation with me about boys specifically hitting. She actually said, used the words touching. Boys touching girls, and how never, under any circumstance, not even with, and I'll quote my mom here, she used to say, not even with a flower do you touch a woman, a young girl, any woman ever in your life. And so this standard, to me, sounds like the police should have the very same standard. If you are found to have struck a woman or a person in a relationship, could be a woman striking a man, you need to do something about it, even if the couple says, we're okay. It was just a fight. It was an altercation. I love him. I love her. I think that's what I'm trying to understand myself, like what we need to do as a society to be more aware of what a toxic relationship is. Because for me, and the way my mother explained it to me, that the minute that happens, that relationship is toxic.
Well, I think physical violence is a hard stop. You know, if your child is in a relationship and there's physical violence, I mean, at that point, I think you need either professional help or they need to be referred to law enforcement. But I think the more subtle signs are what's more difficult. You know, what if your child is texting their partner multiple times a day? Well, in some circumstances, that could be normal behavior. But again, when it starts to take over their life and they're not doing other things that they enjoy and they're withdrawing from family, I think that's a more concerning sign. But it's something that parents really have to be on the lookout for. And I think one of the worst things that parents can do is to tell their child that they forbid them from being in the relationship. Because I think that pushes the relationship underground and it becomes secretive and then they start sneaking behind your back. I think what's better to do is to try to keep it open as possible and maybe have them and their partner hang out at your house so you can actually observe the behavior. So I think trying to end the relationship and forcing them out of it actually in some ways makes the relationship even stronger and more unhealthy.
I think you bring up a good point about how physical violence is sort of one end of the spectrum. But when it comes to these sort of relationships, they don't start off on the first date with physical violence, right? It's kind of like a slowly turning up the temperature on the water until it's boiling. And so when you're in that situation, you may not realize how bad it's getting because it's been baby steps. And I think back to my own life, my own dating history, and how there are things that I put up with as a teenager or as a young adult that I would never put up with now. I didn't know back then that they were red flags. I know now. But when you're younger, you're particularly vulnerable. Can you talk about why teens or young adults may be more vulnerable to these sort of relationships?
Well, there's a very good reason, right? They're still developing. There's a lack of identity, a lack of self-concept. They don't even know who they are at that point. And of course, their brains are more immature, right? So they're more impulsive. They have problems with delayed gratification. They don't weigh the future consequences of their actions. So their actual hardware is actually more mature and they're wired to be more emotional and less logical. So just their brains, by their very nature, make them more prone to these types of relationships.
So, Doctor, there's some startling statistics when we look at violence or toxicity in relationships. I'm just looking at these sort of top-line statistics that come from the NCAD, and 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner, which includes slapping, shoving, pushing, and in some cases, those things might not be actually considered domestic violence. But here's the number that I was focused on. 1 in 7 women and 1 in 25 men have been injured by an intimate partner. 1 in 10 women have been raped by an intimate partner. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been victims of severe physical violence. These numbers are pretty startling, and we do have this act in Congress that is yet to be passed, Violence Against Women Act. You know, again, I sort of wonder about the conversation that we need to be having on a national level about the violence that we sometimes say to ourselves. You know, what happens behind people's closed doors is none of our business.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we have to have a sense of community and shared responsibility. But, you know, violence towards your partner is significant, whether it's same sex or opposite sex. You know, we're dealing with a serious public health issue, and it's something that we need to confront as a society.
Dr. Daniel Bober, we could talk to you for a really long time on this topic. You know, Vlad, you are right that we have to sort of, as a society, check ourselves, the way we speak about the language that we use when we talk about these sort of toxic relationships or abusive relationships. And anyone who's out there, if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling like something is a red flag, like the doctor said, if the person you're with is pulling you away from your loved ones, is making you sort of move away from the things you normally enjoy in life, these are little baby steps. You're not going in a good direction. It's not just always about physical violence, which is the extreme end of the spectrum. There are little things that happen beforehand that you have to really look out for, and your loved ones have to look out for as well.
Can I just add to that, Anne-Marie?
I
actually,
yes.
Anne-Marie, you made me think of a question for the doctor. Sorry, doctor, you were going to say something.
Yeah.
I was going to say, as parents, you need to know that when you feel like you're at the end of your rope with your child and you can't even stand to be around them anymore, that is when they need you the most. So you have to pay attention to that.
The other question that I had for you,
advice.
doctor, is you sometimes have people that say to people who are in toxic relationships, why can't you leave? And I think a lot of times people don't understand when someone says, well, I can't, either because they're in fear of their life or because there's something else going on. Help me understand that. Why is it easy for us to suggest, well, just walk away? Why can't you just walk away? And why is it so hard for some people to say, I can't?
Because they're essentially being held emotional hostage. Their self-esteem, their worth, their very existence is contingent upon the approval of this other person. So even though they may not be physically restrained, they're still emotionally and mentally restrained, and they don't have the wherewithal, the intestinal fortitude, if you will, to leave the relationship because they literally, in their mind, cannot survive without this person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, toxic people are well practiced in manipulation. That's how they do it.
Right?
Many people are defenseless. Exactly, doctor. Dr. Daniel Bober, I wish we could talk to you some more, but we got to let you go. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks, Vlad.
So if you or someone you know needs help, the National Domestic Violence Hotline has counselors available around the clock. That number is 1-800-799-7233.